hosted by the College of Business at Governor State University. I'm Dr. Jung Zhao, Dean of GSU's College of Business. On behalf of my colleagues in the college and the planning committee, thank you for joining us as we kick off our second annual Business Week program. Many of you participated last year in our inaugural Business Week event. You probably remember we held our opening keynote in the Center for Performing Arts, had our career fair in Hall of Governors, and we also had our inaugural Alumni Hall of Achievement and networking dinner in the beautiful banquet hall at the Odyssey Country Club. Unfortunately, this year, we couldn't do any of those in person because of the pandemic, which has profoundly changed every aspect of our lives. The way we go to school, the way we conduct our job duties, the way we interact with each other, and just every aspect of our daily activities. But we are determined to offer the same rich professional engagement experiences for our students, alumni, faculty, staff, and other stakeholders, despite those challenges presented by the pandemic. Fortunately, with support of our internal and external partners, and after months of planning and preparation, we are proud to present to you this year's virtual Business Week program. The two-day program starts today with our opening keynote by Mr. Rick Blasgen, President and CEO, Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, who is also a proud alum of College of Business's Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration program. He will speak on technology, globalization, and the future of work. How will the global pandemic change everything, in an interactive conversation with Dr. Tricia Kearns. Immediately after the opening keynote, we will have two sets of concurrent breakout sessions led by our faculty. They will be discussing timely topics ranging from work-family responsibilities, election risk, election integrity, to facial recognition, machine learning, and supply chain disruptions and shareholders' wealth. Today's event ends at 4 p.m. Tomorrow, we will welcome 10 diverse businesses in a virtual career fair where our students and alumni can meet with recruiters from those companies in virtual one-on-one meetings to learn about their job openings and career opportunities. Students and alumni, if you want to participate in this career fair, you have to pre-register in Jobs for Jaguars platform. You have to take that extra step in order to participate in that virtual platform. So if you haven't done that, please do so today. And the program ends with tomorrow evening's closing keynote and COB Alumni Hall of Achievement at 6 to 8 p.m. This year, our closing keynote will be delivered by Mr. Howard Tolman, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, former CEO of 1871 and the Ed Kaplan Institute. He will speak on disruptive innovation, entrepreneurship, and the future of work. And we will honor 3 outstanding COB alumni in our Alumni Hall of Achievement induction ceremony tomorrow. And participants can also hear this year's alumni inductees to talk about their career journey and their career insights in a alumni career panel. So I hope to see you at those events too. And I hope you agree that we put together a wonderful program that it has everything, something for everybody. So now, without further ado, let me introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Rick Blasgen, and moderator, Dr. Tricia Kearns. Tricia?
Thank you. I am excited to introduce Mr. Blasgen to our keynote speaker and to learn about what he has to share regarding technology and how the impact of the pandemic and other things have occurred this year. Before we get started, I want to mention that at the end of our presentation, we will have time for questions and answers. We will have someone monitoring our chat sessions. If you would like to enter a question there, or feel free to raise your hand on Zoom. So a little bit about Rick. Rick is the President and Chief Executive Officer at the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, better known as CSCMP, located here in Lombard, Illinois. Rick began his career at Nabisco, working in a regional customer service center located in Chicago. While at Nabisco, he held various logistics positions, including the responsibility of inventory management, order processing, transportation and distribution, and operations management. Rick became Vice President of Supply Chain at Nabisco in June 1998, then a Vice President of Craft in June 2002. He then went on to join ConAgra Foods in August 2003 as their Senior Vice President of Integrated Logistics. Rick then went on and was designated by the U.S. Department of Commerce in 2011 to serve as the chair of the Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness, providing the administration advice and counsel on issues and concerns that affected the supply chain sector. He continues to chair that committee today. He's a member of the Northwestern University's Transportation Center Business Advisory Committee and past chair of the Grocer Manufacturing Association Logistics Committee, past president of Warehousing Education and Research Council. Rick is also, and most importantly, an alum of Governor State University, earning his degree in business administration and majoring in finance. Welcome, Rick.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I just want to make sure I can get my screen going here. Can you all see that okay? I guess we can see that okay?
Yes, yes.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Tricia. Thank you, June. Also to the entire team there at Governor State. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. I thought I would start by sharing some recent information from a report that we produce every year. It's called the U.S. State of Logistics Report, and it is the definitive costs of logistics in the United States, but importantly, the trends driving them. Just as a little bit of context, I won't go deep into all of the supply chain parts of this report, because I know that many of you participating today aren't necessarily supply chain folks. We hope you become supply chain folks or understand it certainly in terms of what it does. But the supply chain costs, logistics costs in the United States are $1.6 trillion or 7.6% of our GDP. It's a big number. And you can sort of see that trend there. Most of us recall 2009, 2010, as we went into what we call the Great Recession, and the logistics sector was hit very hard as transportation companies went bankrupt, and there was a lot of demand just taken right out of the economy very, very quickly. And now you sort of see how we've gravitated back up to where we're at now, and hopefully the economy will continue to grow once we're past this pandemic and start reaching new heights from an economic standpoint. So logistics costs are 1.6 trillion. Transportation expense remains the largest single component cost of logistics expense. And that's what drives networks and companies. So many of you may hear about how companies design their distribution networks and why they put distribution centers where they put them. Most of it is dependent upon transportation expense and where they're sourcing from and so on. So we track those costs very uniquely. And I went back a little bit since 2010 and noticed that logistics costs have risen about 49%. Much of that is it's derived from the growth of our economy. But I also went back to 1988, and as a percentage of GDP, our expense has gone down some 33%. And when you just look at visibility tools, you look at how the logistics discipline grew into supply chain, became much more of a competitive weapon in modern day business today. And it retooled. It used the tools, the insights, the visibility that we have now, and redeployed people to more value-added jobs. And we got better from an efficiency standpoint during that time frame. And I just find that fascinating. I know I lived through it in the food industry, you know, not knowing where inventory was back then. You just at times did not know where your inventory was until it showed up at your distribution center. Well, now we know where it is every step of the way. And it's just great to see how we're able to positively impact our customers and therefore our consumers, but also the economies that we serve as well through logistics. I share this only because, as you know, e-commerce sales continue to grow. And I think as we talk further, Tricia and I get into our conversation, we'll talk about e-commerce and what's happened over the past 8-9 months. It was consistently growing as a percentage of retail sales, which then caused differences in network and where we put our inventory. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that, but you can sort of see how e-commerce has continued to grow as we've moved along the spectrum here in supply chain. We talk a lot about warehousing as well, and we manage those numbers, and the warehousing market is very stable. And now over the last year, companies have been filling up warehousing with different types of product, different types of distribution methods and inventories as we continue to serve our consumers and customers during the pandemic, but even beyond that. And you who are all listening today, when you think about your own consumer behavior, I'm sure you've seen that change over the last 9 months to a year, and inventory follows that. We try to anticipate what it is that you are going to do so that we can have inventory there when you want and when you need it. From a trends and outlook standpoint, we look at a lot of the same technologies that have been brought up today and that we'll talk about further. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, very important, excuse me, within the supply chain. As Internet of Things and 5G, what will 5G do to the bandwidth and the capacity that we will have to move information between one key supply chain participant and another? Right now, we're able to move accurate and timely information very, very quickly through the supply chain, and supply chain participants are able to have access to that and see that. And it helps us anticipate not only production, but where we're going to move our inventory. Certainly, the visual technology, the race to automation and robotics was alive and well prior to the pandemic. And much of that was due to the fact that we had a very low birth rate in the United States, and we had labor shortages, you might remember. And so logistics and supply chain folks were looking at robotics inside facilities to reach the ability for a hurdle rate as opposed to throwing more individuals, more people at that. So robotics and automation continue to really be on the forefront within the supply chain discipline as well. Blockchain, a lot of studies going on about blockchain. To me, it reminds me of the early days of RFID, radio frequency identification, where you just don't know where that might take you. But there are a lot of pilots going on in blockchain and a lot of studies and research going on that, of course, we'll take advantage of when appropriate within the supply chain community. And then energy. Energy has always been something that supply chain folks always look at in terms of how we can make ourselves more efficient, be more sustainable, and develop more renewable energies in terms of how we move product. So risk management, I wanted to just touch base on this as well. Risk management has always been important when you think about your consumption of products and when are they disrupted, weather-related issues or other related issues between countries, sourcing-related issues. Well, Asia is 4 times more likely to be affected by natural disasters than Africa, 25 times more likely than Europe or North America. So many supply chain leaders are managing global, complex, extended supply chains, and they have to understand this and ensure they protect their employees, their customers, and their supply chains, because this is the world in which they live. 7 major cities classified as extreme risk are all in Asia. So again, when you extend your supply chain and you're sourcing from countries far and wide, this is something that you have to deal with each and every day. Floods have become 3 times more frequent in the past 30 years. And 152 million people in Asia are vulnerable to natural disasters every year. Think about that a moment. It's almost half of the United States population are vulnerable to natural disasters every year. So from a supply chain standpoint, challenge is a way of life. And all of us in the supply chain are looking at how do we become resilient? How do we mitigate the impact of these disruptions? And how do we manage through what we know will occur each and every year as we go through our supply chain and continue to evolve it. Even the council that I run, it began as the Council of, or the Physical Distribution Management Council back in 1963, and it evolved to the Council of Logistics Management in the 80s, and then the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, which is what we are now. And as I say, if we find life on Mars, we'll be the Intergalactic Council, serving all of your planetary needs someday. So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to chat with you about. And of course, we all look at supply chain and logistics industry disruptors, and many of these are disruptors, not just the supply chain discipline, but other disciplines as well. Technology, all of the things here that you see around technology adoption and how do we implement that is very important to all of us in the supply chain, because it will continue to allow us to become more effective and efficient and be able to move products that much better across the spectrum. And then the macroeconomic trends, many of which we are living through right now, globalization versus nationalization and sustainability, climate disruption, urbanization, all of these things our supply chain leaders have to deal with because it's just of where you're sourcing from and all of the things that could possibly happen. And we have to simulate that and try to understand how to mitigate the disruption. And what about us as consumers, right? We want everything now. We're reliant on expedited service. We expect that product to be there in a matter of hours. Amazing, isn't it? And I often, when I make presentations, I'll often ask, how many of you have gone to the grocery store in the last couple of weeks, and all the hands go up. I may say, well, how many of you only bought exactly what you went in there to buy? And think of yourself as a consumer. So we do all this work on the consumer behavior portfolio, who wants what and how they want it. And then we as consumers go into a store and we come out with something we had no intention of buying. Isn't that fascinating, right? We talk about forecasting and so on, and yet that is our supply chain being agile and flexible and resilient and there, even when we as consumers come out with something we had no anticipation of buying. And then of course, there are always the inevitable operational constraints of labor shortages and driver shortages and free trade and all these things that we deal with on a daily basis. So that is just an overall view of why supply chain is so important in modern business today, and how we as supply chain leaders have to deal with that and what we do within our world to make sure that we're accomplishing what we need to accomplish. So hopefully that gets you a little bit of an insight into supply chain, the magnitude of it. As I mentioned, 7.6% of GDP in the US. It's a massive amount of jobs, and it is there to satisfy the needs of our customers at the lowest total delivered cost. And it's a driving force, a competitive weapon in modern business today. So Tricia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Rick. That was excellent. Just merely to think about the amount of money and product moving through supply chains every single day is incredible. So the year 2020 has been unprecedented, to say the least. So we have a trade war happening with China. The pandemic, of course, is still continuing on. The social movement for racial justice. The election is happening now, less than a month away. So what do you think businesses primarily are affected when we think about these events and these kind of forces that are happening?
Well, we talked a little bit about being resilient and managing that. I think that has really come to the forefront. I mean, so many unanticipated things that could happen in your business. Certainly your supply chain is a big part of your business. As we talked and continue to talk, nearshoring, reshoring, that debate will rage on as companies understand what regulation may come that way in terms of personal protective equipment or other medical devices and things that may be produced on a different continent. that may drive them to produce it closer to their markets, wherever they might be. So I think that this idea of sourcing has always been important. When China entered the World Trade Organization, I believe it was in 2001, we went global. We all remember that, and our supply chain leaders went off to try to lower costs within the supply chain and acquire and source products from different countries because it was such a lower price to do so. And we were able to do that. Well, I also remember when a barrel of oil used to be $30 and it went to $147 back then. Nobody anticipated that. And so the savings that we anticipated from sourcing were superseded by transportation increases because of the cost of energy. So these variables exist in the supply chain, and we always have to be cognizant of that and really understand it. So I think this idea of nearshoring and reshoring will be a debate that will continue to go on for some time. Companies are very good, I think, at finding an equilibrium around service and cost and making sure they have ample product and that supply when they need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. I think about what COVID has done with the everyday consumer and what happened to our food supply. And of course, I think everyone has been impacted just with everyday goods, toilet paper, for example, where the demand skyrocketed and an absolute fear set in. What are you learning about just the general food and consumer goods that are happening domestically with the pandemic?
Well, early on, I was interviewed about toilet paper so many times. And here's what I learned when you look back at that. Remember when the entire economy shut down and we had to stay home? How many millions of people traveled, 60, 70, 80% of the week? Schools were shut down. Restaurants were shut down. All of the people who were on the road utilizing and consuming food and paper products like toilet paper in schools or in restaurants or in other areas, we're now going to the grocery store, right, and buying the same type of toilet paper that the rest of us were buying. And when you go and talk to Kimberly-Clark or other companies that make toilet paper, you'll find out that it's different ply and it's made on a different machine than the toilet paper that's available in stores. So there was a huge shift in demand that was unplanned for. And so the supply chain, when people really got concerned, wow, we can't find that. Are we going to be able to find food? Are we going to be able to find the products that we just take for granted are there for us each and every day? And as we looked back on it, the food supply chain was minimally disrupted. As I remember a pork plant in Iowa had COVID cases and had to shut down, and that was 4%, I think, of the nation's pork supply. So you had these types of issues that occurred, but by and large, the trucking system, the rail system kept going. There were outages of products and things like that because of the huge demand in consumption. I mean, think about all of the people, as I mentioned, that ate most of their meals on the road were now having to go to grocery stores and buy the same chicken everyone else who was not traveling was buying and figure out a way to cook it and all the ingredients and so on. And that were millions and millions of people. So the demand was shifted, the supply then reacted, and you saw the supply chain in food and other products get back online in a reasonable way. And I do recall also talking to some transportation companies when everything was shut down, found they had some problems with their truckers arriving early for their delivery appointments because the roads weren't congested. So they would get there much earlier, and the delivery system had to deal with that, which I thought was kind of an interesting outcome as well.
For sure. When I think about your comment about the World Trade Organization, the forecast that's been published is pointing to the volume of global trade this year will fall to a level not seen since the early 2000s. This will be a painful drop in today's closely connected world economy. Do you think the world will become less connected as a result of the pandemic? And of course, the rising protectionism in some parts of the world.
Yeah, I just don't. Maybe it's my own point of view. And as I look back on economic times that we have seen in the past, there were anticipated huge shifts in global trade. I remember before the Great Recession in 2007, 2006, our ports were well beyond capacity. And then we had that recession, and all of a sudden, our ports were tooled up and became more automated. which they had trouble doing in the past, and it transferred a lot of that volume into a more automated way. So I personally think that we will get through this, and that I hate to say this, but the words "new normal," I'm so tired of hearing them, and the only reason is I get there will be a new normal, but I recall early on when we were evolving our supply chains, there was always a current state and an end state. And I remember saying to our folks, there's never going to be an end state. There might always be a future state, because once you reach the end of your current project, there'll be some economic opportunity, some other issue that will occur to you that will allow you to once again take advantage of new technologies or new opportunities. And so you'll be into another generation of a future state. So certainly things will change in terms of maybe contactless deliveries, all the things that we're experiencing now as consumers, and even post-pandemic when we're, quote, in our new normal and there's available therapeutics and vaccines and so on, there will be things that will change for the better. I think much like after 9/11, when the basic fundamental security changed, the threshold change occurred. I think we'll see that within the supply chain as well.
Yeah, and certainly when you think about some of the technology improvements, it's interesting to see technology on your slides at the beginning of your presentation, because technology wasn't always connected with supply chain. I think we had our MRPs or our green screens, but we never thought about how technology and robots could be picking product. So if you were speaking to a business leader today that said, hey, I do import, I do export, what can I plan or forecast for a year from now?
Planning and forecasting, right? The fundamental components of any supply chain. I think that learning from our history, in the typical forecasting models, you might take 2 years of shipments and try to forecast them into the future and add marketing planning and marketing funding and all of that to see what your lift might be. I think that will still occur. I think that we have better information now on consumers, much better information now on how consumers are consuming their products and in their various classes of trade. Think of it, before you could go to an airport and there'd be a Best Buy vending machine there and you can buy something out of that machine. I often wondered, who's filling that? Who's forecasting that? How do they do that? And fascinating. So I think those types of outlets where we as consumers are finding access to our products in a variety of forms, that data exists for companies to look at and understand what that future might hold. And as a new generation comes into their buying patterns and so on, I think that we'll have better data, better insights with all the tools we talked about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all that data that we have with which to employ in our supply chain. Sometimes I worry that we have so much data and so much access to information. Does it allow us to give ourselves better, the ability to make better decisions? And so I think the ability to have insights that make better decisions is going to be something we're going to have to deal with all of this data that comes at us.
And with every event, and I think you've touched on it, we have success stories and we have significant failures. For example, the business news is sharing all of the hospitality industry is in deep trouble. We've heard about Southwest Airlines, for example, starting to lay off, United. But I want to talk about who are some of the winners because of COVID and because of some of the trade changes that are coming. Who do you think some of the winners are? Why? And then why do you think some of the folks are losing, and why?
Yeah. Well, clearly certain food companies are winners, right? And I talked to some of my old colleagues and they reduced or rationalized some of their products so that they could make the more desired products 24/7, and they were running out of those. So I think that, we saw major shifts in food distribution. I think, carriers, look at Amazon, UPS, FedEx, a lot of the home delivery type carriers are doing quite well and likely will continue to do so, because I do think we have a threshold increase in e-commerce now. And there were a lot of people who never bought anything online, and this was the only way for them to get access, did it and found out it could work. And so you have a change in the distribution system, the transportation system that reacted quickly to that. So I think that, we always talk about agility and flexibility in supply chain, but it's hard to just take a plant that has been there, a manufacturing facility that requires a lot of capital, and immediately make it flexible. It's easy to say, very hard to do from a packaging standpoint and just a capital standpoint. So I think that as companies are able to be a little bit more flexible in changing their manufacturing systems, their manufacturing relationships, if they have co-planned or co-managed facilities and so on, they'll be in a better position. So I do think it's industry by industry. I mean, the hospitality industry, Tricia, that you brought up, I mean, hit so hard, right? I mean, in so many different ways, and hopefully we'll come out of it, and we'll start seeing people travel more frequently, and we'll start seeing having in-person events and things like that. All of this is great, but nothing replaces in-person events, right? So I think that the companies that have become more flexible, more resilient, and are able to pivot are the ones that win. And we'll start seeing that in the future as they begin to build that into their supply chain futures.
Mm-hmm. And I think about your comment earlier. There were some people that never ordered food from a grocery store to be delivered online to their door. And today they are.
That's right.
Brick and mortar stores. There are a lot of people that, wanted to drive to a brick and mortar store to physically touch the product. They are now being introduced to a technology that may reshape how we shop, even coming toward Christmas time.
Well, yeah, exactly. Even before this pandemic, I did a lot of work with real estate firms who, were planning out distribution parks. And I would say, okay, if e-commerce is 13, 14, 50% of retail sales, what happens if it gets to 30 or 40 or 50%? Are people no longer going to go into a retail store or a mall to buy a product? Is that generational? And I do a lot of, make a lot of presentations with students and so on. And each time I'll ask, how many of you would never go into a store again if you didn't have to? And about half the hands go up. It is not a wonderful experience for a lot of people. And I think a lot of retailers have figured that out and are making changes. But I often think about what happens in our supply chain if 40, 50% of our retail goods that we commonly get when we go out and purchase them are coming to us. Where is that inventory coming from? What vehicle is shipping it? And does that vehicle become congested in New York City or in some location where we're already congested? And is there a congestion toll that, we've talked about that in the past? Where does that inventory come from? Right now we see retailers like Sam's, Target, others who have taken stores, made them fulfillment centers, because now you have local piles of inventory that are in your neighborhood to serve your every need, and you get it quickly. And so I think that's going to continue to be something that we need to think about, not only from a supply chain standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. Are we going to go out and purchase our goods like we've always done, or are we going to just have everything delivered to us?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And of course, when we think about having everything delivered to us, whether it be food, medicine, anything we might need at the house, the question then becomes about technology and how technology is such a part of our life. And I'm sure some of our listeners, our audience, they may not know what blockchain is or artificial intelligence. Spend a little time describing, and by the way, RFID, wow, that was supposed to be a thing of the future. So bring that in, because I believe some of that technology with RFID is driving some of the technology we're actually seeing today and some of the hopes.
Yeah, but I remember the early days of RFID. Radio frequency identification tags were going to be on our products, and we were going to be able to know where our products were, because we would have readers all over our distribution systems and into our stores and so on. I remember being in discussions when people said, we could have satellites go over and upload inventory of products in everyone's pantry. Fascinating to think about, hard to absorb all that data and make a different decision from it. So, I think RFID, though, has played an important part in terms of radio frequency technology within warehousing systems, in terms of reducing inventory mismatches. Our inventory is so much more accurate in our distribution systems. I think that in retailers, it's worked its way into theft reduction. That's played an important role with high volume and highly priced items in certain retailers and so on. So I think that there's always an initial technology, and then coming out of it, people figure out a different way to use it or a better way to employ it. And I think that'll happen with, you know, machine learning and artificial intelligence. We have so much data. You know, all of us have had this experience. I remember I had to buy some carbon media for a whole house filter I have from Pelican. I bought that, it was shipped, I installed it. And every website I went to, no matter where I went, I saw another advertisement for Pelican. I mean, I believe one day I was looking in my rear view mirror driving along the highway, and there was a Pelican, you know, advertisement. Fascinating, right? Just to sort of see that immediately employed into our visual senses and so on. So, you know, blockchain, presumably everybody who is a participant on that blockchain has access to the same information, and it's not penetrable from hacking and so on. We'll see. You know, there's been some pilots and tests around that. There are some who say, well, it absorbs so much energy, I don't know that we'll ever figure that out. Others who say, well, in some financial arenas, it can work very well, and maybe eliminate intermediaries who just don't need to be part of that transaction because we all are able to view that data. So I think technology is going to continue to play an important point, but there is one point, if I could, I want to remind everyone of. It is our supply chains are still physical. We obtain raw materials, ingredients, packaging supplies, we convert them to finished goods. We move that into a building where we can consolidate it, primarily to take advantage of transportation. We consolidate it and move it along its way, maybe to another retailer distribution center where it once again is consolidated with other products from other manufacturers. And then it is shipped, hopefully on a full truck, to a store where we now have access to that to try to take advantage of the transportation system. Or, as I said, that inventory may be shipped to us in a smaller package to our home. But I remember when I was at Nabisco thinking to myself and chuckling, if I could build an Oreo in your stomach, I could save so much money on packaging and transportation and so on. But we can't yet do that. Maybe someday we will be able to do that. But for now, it's very physical. So we have all this data, yes. We have all this timely information, and it's more accurate, but we still physically have to move products. And I just don't ever want to forget that, because you know, we see pictures of two ships colliding in the ocean. How does that happen? Oceans are pretty big, but you know, somehow that happens. Or railroads that go off the track, and you have this huge mess that you got to clean up, and things like that happen. And we want to put people in a war room and tell them to go figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen again. It's a physical supply chain, and I don't think we can ever forget that.
Absolutely, and well said. I think about some of the drones that we're watching videos today in classes where UPS is actually launching a drone with packages to arrive to your house, minimizing the handling, minimizing the damage as well. What are you hearing about drones out in the supply chain world?
Yeah, lots of different ways that they're being utilized. I remember in the early days, the cameras were so much better. We were flying them over football fields to watch practices. We were flying them over railroad yards to look at switching and so on. And now hopefully we'll be able to make deliveries of products at some point. We'll see where that takes up, you know, what kind of role that plays. But I think there will be a role in drones. At one of our conferences, we had Keller Renato, who was with a company called Zipline, and he was using drones to get blood into countries in Africa that were otherwise not accessible, and infusing blood into human beings in a matter of 30 minutes through his ability to use drones. Fascinating when you utilize that technology and think about its future use. So I do think there will be a lot more testing. Like any technology and piece of equipment, it will get better and better as it evolves. Probably be able to carry heavier weights and things like that. And we'll figure out a good use for that type of technology. So we'll see. People are pretty creative in terms of how to make a delivery better.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears and talk about human resources. Let's talk about the idea that including Governor State, because of the pandemic, we're working from home. A lot of employers, and of course, as you mentioned, supply chain, you physically have to be there. You have to unload a truck, you have to stock the product, you have to count the product. But talk about what you're hearing in the industry with employees now being shifted to work from home, the offices that are now empty, and what that future looks like for those employees.
Yeah, a lot of discussion going on right now on that. Even here in Chicago, there's corporate headquarters like McDonald's and other companies who have said, nobody's coming back or very limited staff till at least the first of the year. And often wonder what's the threshold by which we will want that. And we have tools like this with which to do our jobs better. There is something to be said for getting people in a town hall and creating excitement over a sales opportunity or a new product introduction, or something to get people really fired up and a level of energy on something that they are trying to accomplish. So, I think we have learned a lot about these tools, and they are helping us through the time of need remain connected. There are a lot of people who feel and do miss the human interaction in offices or in conferences, sporting events, things like that nature, because we are human beings and that is our nature to gather. So I think there'll be a hybrid of utilizing these tools that we now know how to use better, and we can use them accurately. They're easier to employ in our daily business life. But I also think that there will be a need for people and a desire for people to get together and look at new technologies. Think about material handling exhibitions, or our exhibition at our CSCMP conference, where new technology, you can look at them, you can sort of think about how that might be employed in my supply chain. We do a good job of it virtually, but I'm not sure if it takes the place of seeing those things in person, being with people, developing a relationship. We can talk about networking forever. So I'm a big proponent of that, obviously, and it's a fundamental axiom of supply chain and business in nature. So we'll see, Tricia, where it all goes. I don't know. I do think there'll be a combination, though, of a lot of different things yet to be determined.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I also think about, we've always done business globally.
Right.
And the ability to speak with other countries at different times. And we've always done it virtually, but it's a little different when it's domestic, where you're actually on a computer with someone that might be in the next town over. You can't really get that feel like we're used to when we're doing business globally.
Yeah, what happens to all this real estate, this commercial real estate, this industrial office space? I recall conversations, as I mentioned earlier, what happens to malls? Do we convert them to schools? Do they become, automobile lots? What happens to these? Well, what happens to the commercial real estate where people would have offices? I mean, we were already in a model of reducing the number of square footage that we needed because of technology, and we wanted people to be closer together in a lot of different industries. So that'll be an interesting sort of future to see the evolution of commercial real estate and office space and such.
Mm-hmm. And I also then think about everything that's connected with the commercial offices that are no longer occupied, like the restaurants, the quick stop stores that we would run into, or even our cars, the way we transport ourselves. If we no longer have to do that, the insurance company changes. And of course, we can continue on with the autonomous vehicles coming and some of the
right.
discussions that, seem to be not too far away these days. So,
well, think of Uber and Lyft and these ride sharing services 10, 15 years ago. If somebody were to say, that's going to be a common everyday occurrence, we would have said, oh, crazy, that's nuts. Nobody's going to, taxi cabs aren't going to allow that to happen. Here we are. So, it's just fascinating, the ingenuity and creativity. I'm of course biased to supply chain. I think supply chain people are very creative, but the creative people who use these technologies or create them, and then those who say, well, I know how to apply that in my business. That's fascinating to sort of see how people are able to take this technology, autonomous vehicles you brought up. And, that's a big debate, right? Are we going to have driverless trucks running around at any scaled way in 5 or 10 years? You mentioned I chair this committee for the Department of Commerce, and we often meet with the Department of Transportation. and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And whenever we ask them, you know, what do you think about autonomous vehicles? We're going to see them anytime soon. They sort of cower, you know, because of safety issues and so on. And but yet we will see that. We have seen driverless trucks or driver-assisted vehicles in ports and things like that, where there's less pedestrian traffic. And so it's another technology that will continue to evolve, and we'll figure out a way to employ it.
Absolutely. And of course, that leads me to a very popular topic today is the vaccine that's expected to come for COVID and a global demand. What are you hearing? What are people talking about? How to keep the vaccine at such a below zero temperature and move it to the most remote areas across the world?
Lots of companies are looking at that in the transportation arena, working with all the companies that are producing them, like J&J and the other companies that have been in the news, creating these vaccines. So, you know, you've got definitely have people figuring that out from a government standpoint, but industry is going to have to step in and manage that and figure out how to effectively get that protected product rapidly and deploy it quickly. How do you forecast something like that, right? And so there'll be a lot of discussion about that, but I'm confident that when there's ample vaccine available, the distribution system will step up and it will be there. I guarantee you there are people who are planning that out and trying to figure out, working with partners too. This isn't just going to be the trucking industry is going to figure that out, or the railroad industry or the airline industry. There will be modes of transportation working together to make sure, depending upon the geographic world we're serving, how to work together to make that happen effectively and efficiently.
Mm-hmm. And I, of course, enjoy the new vocabularies we're learning, the freezer farms, or how to do the supply chain lanes in the middle of nowhere. You talked about drones doing deliveries that otherwise would never reach those areas. You're exactly right, especially when we think about a global demand. And forecasting certainly would be difficult to even begin to calculate or even think about what that might be. Excellent, yeah.
Well, and it's good, you know, for those of us and those of you here who were not supply chain aware, if you will, and during the early days, we heard it every day. We had a supply chain briefing and a supply chain this, supply chain that, you know, and so we heard about it all of the time. And I often thought about, you know, what I did in my career. The supply chain was this wire between the switch and the light. You flipped the switch, the light went on, and you didn't call your power company up and thank them because you expected the light to go on. You call your power company up when the light doesn't go on. Well, when do logistics and supply chain people sometimes get called? When there's a failure, when the truck doesn't show up, when something ordered isn't received correctly or invoiced correctly, right? So we've made it, this mystical, magical things that occurs that we all enjoy until it doesn't occur. And now, you know, all of a sudden, you know, you're supply chain savvy a little bit more. So I'm very, very proud of our supply chain discipline becoming more aware and getting it into, as we've talked for many times now, how do we get supply chain as a destination career into lower levels of our education system? Because we'll talk a little bit about careers. Hopefully, they're so far and wide, so dynamic, so high energy. It's a wonderful career to have, and now we're starting to see more and more folks not just stumble across supply chain as a career, but really go out and seek it.
Mm-hmm. And exactly right. And that was going to be my next question. We have returning students or students in our supply chain majors that are excited to get out there and get going. What would you say to them today, or even those young people that are saying, I don't know what to do, but now I know what supply chain is? What would you expect to share with them? How to prepare them for what the future is?
Come to us or find a mentor, find somebody in supply chain. Supply chain folks really love to talk to students about supply chain. We are actively involved in trying to get this discipline into, as I mentioned, those who just don't understand it. So if I was a person trying to think about my career, you may think supply chain is a truck driver or a box kicker. It is not. There are so many data analytical type jobs. There are so many different parts of industry you can go into: supply chain, retailers, manufacturers, third-party logistics providers who have these vast networks of distribution centers and transportation equipment, technology developers. You know, think about all of the software and hardware systems that we use and employ in our supply chain. If you know supply chain, you're better able to create something that a supply chain professional is going to use. Mentioned real estate. So many supply chain professionals are in the real estate world, thinking about the distribution networks of the future and how we construct buildings to handle things differently. If you have great interpersonal skills, that's helpful. And to be able to advance a common agenda with someone in another function. You know, we often talk about collaboration. You know, I think one definition of collaboration was to cooperate with an enemy that has invaded your country. You know, we're not designed to collaborate. We didn't in the early days, manufacturers didn't immediately share information with the retailers because they thought they were giving up leverage. Well, now it's very common for manufacturers and retailers to share information because they have a common goal, and that is having our product on the shelf or in a package ready to ship to somebody when the consumer wants it. So the supply chain discipline, the supply chain jobs are so far and wide, and they're global. If you're interested in a position in another continent, whether you're in Europe or Asia or in the United States, you can do that in supply chain, because we want people to be able to bring different cultures, different backgrounds to the supply chains in Europe, which are different than the supply chain in the US or in India or where have you. So I know I'm a broken record about the supply chain discipline, but it's a very, very wonderful and interesting field, and you're gonna have a wonderful career in supply chain.
Yes, for sure. And I enjoyed my many years in supply chain, and very proud of the fact that I now work for Governor State, who's invested heavily in our new supply chain center, some of our graduate programs, our undergraduate programs geared towards supply chain. And we're partnered with a really great professional organization called CSCMP,
Yeah.
so without a doubt. So we are having questions coming in, and I'd like to reach out to the audience. If you have questions, go ahead and start posting those, because we've got quite a few that have already come in. So let me start with the first one. Since a big portion of our PPE inventory used in healthcare is manufactured in Asia, are you expecting any changes in this particular field for the future?
You know, I think it's going to come down to government regulation. You know, we hear all of the rhetoric around, we remember masks early on, you know, why are we have to produce our masks here? And there was an issue with 3M in Canada, or a distribution problem somewhere with a company. I can't recall a lot of the rhetoric I think will subside, and supply chains are very good at figuring out to manage that flow of inventory. If it's regulated and there are edicts that come down that say this product must be produced in this country or in this part of the world, then supply chains will go ahead and companies will figure out a way to do that. So, you know, I'm not certain that will be the case. We'll see. But I know for a fact that our supply chain leaders will manufacture that product. They will partner with people who can and come up with a supply chain that delivers total lowest landed cost and satisfies the needs of our consumers. I'm very confident of that.
And especially during a pandemic, when we all want to do everything we can to help each other. Certainly saw that with some of the major manufacturers, such as Ford with the ventilators, switching over
Right.
facilities very quickly. So certainly proud from that perspective. Another question, isn't this an opportunity to move out of the current Excel sheet comparison as we move into a period of software experts, but do not understand what they're purchasing in supply chain? Never a true cost of ownership, and yet an executive bonus plans are based on a percentage of the reduced price, when saving end up being in larger costs somewhere in the value stream.
Great. I love this because I've done so much work in my career of trying to get different functions that actually had goals that were in conflict with one another and never knew it. Mm-hmm. And there are, by the way, a lot of companies who still use Excel sheets and didn't have the capability to move into a more modern tool. They're getting there slowly but surely. But there's a lot of legacy systems and things that are so connected. It just takes time to do that. But this point about people are experts who don't understand what they are purchasing in the supply chain or why is a good one. And I recall in my past, I brought the bonusable objectives of the head of manufacturing, sales, myself and logistics and marketing together, and brought in some senior HR folks and said, just stare at these. And one of them finally said, you guys all have goals that are in conflict. You know, manufacturing may have a goal of lowest cost per pound or unit produced. So they're going to want to make the same thing as many times as they can during the day, right? And well, if I go and say, well, but the demand stream says we don't need that product, we need to switch over and produce another product. Oh, well, that's going to higher my cost of this unit. Yeah, but the customer doesn't want that. Well, I'm not graded on what that person wants. I'm graded on lowest cost per product produced or lowest cost per pound produced. And that's a direct conflict. So we've seen that over the years, and that's one of the reasons collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment was built. It was all about how do we get total cost of ownership and how do we get total landed cost or delivered cost, you might hear, and have functions that share in service objectives, share in inventory objectives, right? So if I'm in procurement, I just want to buy stuff at the lowest possible price, but if it's product that's not being consumed or in demand, what have I done? I've lowered my cost, and yet I've created a shortage and therefore a sales issue and a margin issue on the other end. So there is work to be done here in collaboration, and it's a great question. And you're right, executive bonus plans have to be more aligned around what are we trying to accomplish as a company. I remember in my former companies, one executive says, well, geez, it might have been Kraft or Nabisco, I can't recall. How many New York Stock Exchange ticker symbols do we have for Nabisco? And somebody said, well, just one. Well, how is it that we're working against each other and not coming up with a plan that supports each other, that elevates our stock price and therefore your bonus plan? So more work to be done here.
Yeah, I liked what you said. I remember working for a manufacturing company where the objective was to run as much as you can. And we were on a just in time and the machine just kept running.
Yeah.
Don't want to shut it down to change over. So absolutely, absolutely. So everyone knows Schwann's Foods, and maybe some of our audience maybe they don't know who Schwann's Foods. They've been around since the 60s, and they're basically a grocery delivery company that has been around well before the Instacarts of the world and some of these same-day grocery delivery companies. Talk a little bit about, primarily in the grocery business, what are some of the major companies doing, the Jewel Osco, the Mariano's in our area? Talk a little bit about some of the changes.
Yeah, you know, you've seen order online, pick up in store, right? We've seen that for those folks that don't want to go into the store, and that's more convenient. There's still folks who want to look at produce and meat and purchase that right from the shelf. They're uncomfortable with someone else doing that for them. You know, the home delivery systems that are alive and well in certain geographic areas are convenient. Will we as consumers continue to pay more? Possibly, sure. There are those doing that now that simply enjoy that service and are willing to pay for that service. So I think this comes down to the area in which you live and the geographic distance, if you will, between stores and the consumer, how much you're willing to pay for it. And then also in the grocery industry, you have to worry about shelf life and product protection. If it's a frozen or refrigerated product and you live in a high rise somewhere in Chicago, can I get ice cream and frozen products delivered to my condominium complex? And does that complex have a freezer that I trust is going to maintain that storage in the future for that product? So I think the characteristics of the product matter. And I think the price we're willing to pay as a consumer will reach its own level. And we've often done that. If we're willing to pay for that service, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day service. I mean, if somebody said to you, you know, I'm ordering a refrigerator filter, you can order it by 10 a.m. and get it by 2 p.m. Great. If I don't need that refrigerator filter, and if I order it and get it delivered 5 days later, the price is half, would you do it? Most would if you don't need it that day. So I think those types of relationships between what we're willing to pay and the service we expect to receive will continue to go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And fantastic responses from our audiences. There's more questions, but I do want to remind everyone out there, feel free also to raise your hand and you can ask a question, but I'm going to keep going because we've got several more that have come in. As noted, supply chains are physical. However, technology is more integrated into our day-to-day lives, decreasing the amount of physical face-to-face contact, especially during the pandemic, of course. Does it seem that business and society may have to be more strategic in the future with inviting that kind of contact?
I think that's a great point to be made, and I don't think that story's been written yet. But I do agree. I mean, I think what we see at distribution centers with truck drivers, as an example, having contactless delivery and not coming in contact with anyone, there'll be changes that will occur there just simply by the nature of someone who is, by virtue of their job, crossing states or crossing countries and making a delivery. I think that type of thing will occur and will change. So businesses will certainly figure that out in terms of contactless delivery and how we get access to products, minimizing that contact. It might evolve into packaging, different types of packaging as well. I think will play an important role. So we'll see how that occurs out. Packaging has always played an important role in supply chain, and we always want to ship more net weight than gross weight, so minimize the amount of packaging, but still protect the product and present it in a way that's pleasant from a marketing standpoint. So yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think business and society are going to be more strategic in the future.
Absolutely. I also think about the compost, when you're going into that grocery store and you're standing waiting to check out, there's all those items that you just grab to put into the cart, because of course we usually don't buy exactly what's on our list. We buy all more. So how to continue to prompt the consumer to do that when they're buying from their kitchen table or on their living room couch on the internet. Yeah, absolutely. So another, it's actually an alum of Governor State. The name looks familiar, a student of mine. He says, hey, I'm looking for a job in supply chain and there are so many titles. What would you suggest they look for in a position if they don't know what they're good at? And of course, we know there's hundreds of them, and it just depends on what industry you want to be in. What advice would you give him?
I would say, find out from the company exactly the functions that are part of that job. Don't let a title throw you, because they are different in different industries. There's no standardization, if you will, or minimal standardization in certain jobs. Certainly if you're a procurement specialist, you're going to be procuring raw materials, ingredients, packaging, supply services, likely. If you're a transportation planner, you're going to be, quote, planning transportation. Some of them are more meaningful, but or relate easily to identify. But I think that there's, when you think about your skills and what makes you more successful, do you like and enjoy interpersonal skills? Do you like analytical skills? Looking at information and making a better decision on it? Do you like the more macro view of looking at a network and trying to figure out how to better design it because inventory flows or demand patterns have changed? Do you like operations? There's no replacement in my mind for the experience of going into a distribution center and seeing product loaded on a truck, unloaded on a truck, loaded on a rail car, how you store it. Gets back to my point about everything is still physical, and really understanding that operation from the inside out, as opposed to staring on a screen and seeing 100,000 cases move out of a distribution center. When you see 100,000 cases move out and they're retrieved and selected and staged and protected and loaded on a truck, and you watch the truck leave the yard at the right time, that's physical. And I don't know that there's a replacement. So my advice would be, if you ever get the opportunity in your supply chain career to work in a location that has physical operations going on it, go do that. I did that in my career and it helped me immensely. I just didn't know about being able to draw on those experiences till later in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And of course, I can't help but make a point about certification, professional certifications, and how pursuing those kind of certifications help guide you. Do you happen to know the Certified in Global Business Professional certification?
I am not familiar with that. Obviously, at CSCMP, we have a plethora of certifications from our brand is called SC Pro. We have SC Pro Fundamentals, and then level 1, level 2, level 3, and they advance as you go through your career. And the reason is we're big proponents of lifelong learning. When you come out of a university with a great supply chain program, you're getting maybe 18 to 21 credit hours in supply chain, and this field has become so broad and so wide and varied that you got to keep yourself fresh. You have to continue to keep learning, and that's part of what our association does in conjunction with the universities like Governor State. So you know, I think that certifications and continuing to sharpen your saw, as we say, and make sure that you keep yourself abreast of the latest in supply chain. There's ways to do that, and you can never become stagnant.
Absolutely, yeah. And Stephen Covey's quote there, to keep your saw sharpened, it's critical. And I think today you've got to continue to count on your professional organizations to keep you up to date. So I tell my students all the time, just because you're done with your degree doesn't mean it's over. You've got to keep going. And CSCMP is an excellent place to partner, as Governor State Universities partnered with you as well. So let's shift gears and talk about corporate social responsibility. Talk a little bit about how social responsibility is absolutely critical in supply chain.
It is critical, and I recall fondly when the word green was all the rage, and I thought to myself, gosh, maybe we were green before it was cool to be green, because we always wanted to put as much product on a truck. We didn't want the truck to run empty, or the railroad car, or we wanted to keep inventory moving, because inventory at rest did not do anyone any good. We wanted to keep, all of that, the horizontal flow of inventory and information, keep that moving within supply chain. That was one of the things that was early on in the logistics world. Now we care about making sure wastewater treatment is tended to at a manufacturing facility. We have trucking companies who are making more efficient and effective vehicles, utilizing less fuel, and hopefully renewable energy will be brought into our supply chain even more in the future than it is now. We have some warehouses in the Sun Belt that are retooling and have retooled their roofs to capture solar power. All kinds of different things that our supply chains can do. And we care deeply about that. You will see that in quarterly reports and 10Ks of publicly traded companies about what they're doing in terms of corporate social responsibility, and trying to build that into each component part, each function, each part of the supply chain, from sourcing all the way through to delivery and recycling as well. How do we get that recycled cardboard and packaging back so that it doesn't end up in a landfill?
Yeah, absolutely. And you just hit a point. When we think about social responsibility, we have to think about some of the lower cost countries and keeping people safe, making sure that child labor laws are in place, and how to manage that when you're several tiers down from your particular supplier you're doing business with. What kind of experience do you have in, helping companies realize you have to just keep going down that supply chain to be sure? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you do. I recall the early days, again, of globalization, where you didn't know that someone you had contracted for a product in a particular country had subcontracted that out, never told you. And we ended up with lead on toys and different things like that, where the procurement function got really smart and started getting much more into where are we sourcing from, who, where is this product coming from out of the ground, what kind of minerals are being utilized in this process, how do we know that, how do we secure, in the food industry as an example, our food supply from the acquisition of raw materials from the field all the way through to consumption. I think we have better data now, better tools, better relationships with people and companies across the world with which to understand that. But yet, things will still go unnoticed until somebody notices that, and the right minded people will get involved and change that. And so, we've got to continue to focus on understanding. That's why I said earlier about this physical nature of it, all the way down through the to where the individual component part is coming from. Where's it coming from? Who is producing it, and how has it worked its way into the finished good?
Yeah, and it's a good point. I think about some of the technology improvements that are coming our way, such as blockchain, that
Right.
will help us keep a closer eye on what's happening all the way back through, without a doubt. So I wanted to also just ask a question on your CSCMP SC Pro Level 1. We have incorporated that in our programs at Governor State. Talk a little bit about, I'm a graduate student, I think about becoming certified. What can I expect to learn from the knowledge? And of course, I can speak from experience. I've actually sat for the exam. Talk a little bit about how the exam was put together and some of the subject matter.
Sure. I recall vividly meetings between academics and practitioners, because what we wanted to build was a reflection of the true supply chain, and not only the functions, but how they relate to one another, and then how they relate to the company business and mission and to the customer, and then that horizontal flow. And that SC Pro Level 1 does that, I think, very well. You get a deep dive into how finance plays a role into the supply chain, how manufacturing, logistics, and sales play a role into that supply chain. What are the ultimate goals and objectives of the supply chain? And can you demonstrate that you have knowledge of that? So it is a rigorous test. It does require you to really understand and focus. If you have no experience in procurement, as an example, you should need to get that that content which we offer in terms of learning and so on, so that you can understand that part of the supply chain. And when you think of the supply chain in total, people often, in the old days, they would ask, how do I become vice president of supply chain in 3 years? I'm like, well, you don't. And if you do, it's unlikely you'll be very successful, because there's no replacement for that experience. So we try to make our certification experiential, if you will, and really focus on not only a deep understanding of the function, but how that function relates to the success of the entire supply chain.
Absolutely. Rick, it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you today, help educate our listeners and our audience. And I'm certainly proud to call you a partner as well as a business colleague here at Governor State University. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you all. And thanks everyone for participating, and thank you all for what you're doing there. It's important to our industry, and I am honored to call myself an alumni there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick and Tricia. I really enjoyed that presentation and conversation. Right now, we are going to move to the second part of today's event. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so right in just a few minutes, we'll start the first sets of breakout sessions led by our faculty. If you are going to attend Dr. Ujjvala Rajadehiksha's presentation on navigating work-family responsibilities across the globe, don't go anywhere, just stay here. That continues here in just a few minutes. And then in another Zoom session, Professor William Cressy will talk about election risk limiting audits. The link is provided here. You can simply click on the link if you are in Zoom, or you can call in. Of course, you also needed to enter the password and meeting ID. All this information is also on our webpage for Business Week. So you can go there. All the links are provided on the webpage. So we'll allow a few minutes for people to make any transition if they want. There may be people who just join us for the breakout session. So we'll start in 3 minutes, the next presentation. Thank you again, Rick and Tricia.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to end my screen share. Ujjvala, you want to start loading your PowerPoint? If you want.